The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Officers found out where the sensitive areas were in Armstrong's background. He had a dual personality. To sit down and talk to him about any of the crimes, any of the victims, locations, etc., he was very forthcoming. But when you started to probe his personal life, that's when he began to change. He became very hostile. He was angry about his father. He had this deep hatred for his dad. He didn't want to talk about his younger life, but he had no problems talking about the cases. And he was very remorseful about the victims. But he led you to believe that his internal problems became the motivation to commit these crimes. Detective Everett Monroe, Detroit Police Department. From the Baby Doll Serial Killer, The John Eric Armstrong Homicides, by B.R. Bates with Gerald Cliff, Ph.D. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. I see you as you hear me. This is episode 114, Unsafe Harbor, part 2 on the Baby Doll Serial Killer, The John Eric Armstrong Homicides, by B.R. Bates with Gerald Cliff. Part 1 found us in Detroit, Michigan in January 2000, and we learned about 5 women who were tragically murdered. Monica Johnson, Wendy Jordan, Rosemarie Felt, Kelly Jean Hood, and Nicole Young, who all mattered, who were loved, and deserved far better. But the victim list did not end there. Natasha Olnichak and Zelda Jacobowski had survived the killer, who attempted to strangle them to death. With both the Dearborn Heights and Detroit Police Departments investigating, John Eric Armstrong was questioned after he discovered a body in the icy Rouge River. His new 1989 bluish Jeep Wrangler was impounded. Polygraphed, swabbed, blood taken, and with great difficulty, hair was collected as evidence, with John Eric Armstrong emerging as the number 1 suspect. How could this sweet, introverted, hard-working, married man and father be some crazed killer? Everyone just knew it was impossible. Released as the investigation went forward, Armstrong's neighbor, Aeon Cruz, was asked to telephone the police if Armstrong was seen leaving the house with a lot of suitcases, with Cruz's fiancée, Catherine, unable to sleep at night. Still working at Target, Eric, as he was called, would confide in his colleague, Nancy Miller, saying the police immediately were suspicious of him. And Nancy said, quote, "He told me the police were questioning him, and there was no way that he could have done it. Then all of a sudden, his Jeep was impounded, and things kinda started falling apart for him," end quote. Awkwardly for Nancy, he told her about the blood and hairs being taken for testing. Now she knew that they can figure out a lot from those tests. Another co-worker, Jennifer, was 16 when she took the part-time job in 1989, like Eric, working evenings and weekends. This fostered a bond of friendship between them, and on occasion, Eric would drive Jennifer to and from work. Later would come the icy realization that he had killed women in the exact same seat where Jennifer had sat. Jennifer told our author that her conversations with Eric often focused on their parents. She shared her teenage angst, while Eric expressed frustration with his unsupportive mother and that he hated her while growing up. Eric frequently spoke about his wife, Katie, whom he loved and regarded as a great mom. After learning about her pregnancy, he groused about needing their own place away from his in-laws. After he discovered the body, Eric recounted his experience to Jennifer, feeling ill and shocked, only to find him suspected by the police. He complained that the police had taken his trash cans, while all the while he seemingly enjoyed the attention law enforcement was giving him. Detective Petrie would later acknowledge that searching trash cans on the curb is standard procedure. By then, Eric had been placed under surveillance, limiting his activities. After all of this, Jennifer not only lost her rides, with the car impounded, but she and Nancy believed something about Eric's story was off. When asked about the staged burglary, Jennifer mentioned that Eric had had a bandage on his face afterward and enjoyed the sympathy he received over the injuries. He was seen as a kind Southern gentleman with a strong work ethic. Yet after the trash can thief incident, he left his job at Target for another position at the Detroit Metro Airport. Then, some of the lab results came back, revealing animal and human hair on Wendy Jordan's belongings and on the tape lifts from the Jeep. Jeep carpet fibers were consistent with those on Wendy's hosiery, and the gold flecks found on the tape matched those from her shoe, proving that Wendy had been in that Jeep. Now Dearborn Heights PD were waiting for the DNA results before making an arrest, once again caught up in the hurry up and wait situation, while Eric was well aware that they were building a case against him. Anxiety was the word of the day until those DNA results came back, and that could take months in the year 2000. In March, Eric visited North Carolina to see family and visit his baby brother's grave. Returning home to Dearborn Heights, his behavior escalated. Rose Felt was murdered in mid-March, and 2 weeks later, on April 2, 2000, 42-year-old Wilhelmina Drain was waiting for a bus on Michigan Avenue when Armstrong, mistakenly thinking she was a prostitute, offered her a ride. After asking him if he was one of those crazy killers, he assured her that he was no threat. Riding in the Jeep now, Wilhelmina directed him towards her home. He seemed like a nice guy and she appreciated his help. However, when he turned down a secluded alley, Wilhelmina became scared. Grabbing her by the neck, she began to fight, the scarf she wore helping to deflect his hands. Lunging again, she pulled out a can of mace, even with his hands closed around her neck, as she sprayed him, and she jumped out of the car. Several days later, after she learned about the 3 bodies found at the railroad, she felt that she should file a police report and vowed never, ever to accept a ride from a stranger again. A few days after the assault on Wilhelmina, a sex worker named Devin Morris, age 22, was picked up by John Eric Armstrong. At the time, Devin was transitioning and was dressed as a woman. She asked Eric if he was a cop, and he assured her that no, he was not. Getting in his Jeep, they discussed price and agreed upon a rate, parking along Michigan Avenue. Devin took note of Armstrong's tattoos, admiring them, and then Armstrong would grab her by the throat, hissing that he, quote, hates fucking prostitutes, end quote. Devin wrestled free and jumped out of the car, leaving her purse behind. She shouted that she wanted it back, while Armstrong insisted she get back in the Jeep. Devin refused as he drove off, but she recalled the name Eric embroidered on his work shirt. Not long after, Kelly Jean Hood was probably murdered, although the exact date remains uncertain, and Armstrong was on the prowl again. On April 10th, he targeted a woman, street-named Jasmine, whose real name was Cynthia Marie Smith. At 20 years old, she was wearing a black leather jacket, a cheetah print blouse, and jeans when Armstrong approached her on Michigan Avenue around 3:30 a.m., asking if she needed a ride. We're starting to see his MO pretty clearly here. He withdrew $100 from an ATM and parked. Reports vary about what happened next. Cynthia told the police that he demanded she remove her coat and give him her purse, which she refused. When she tried to exit the locked passenger door, He pulled a knife, pressing her against the door, assaulting her, while muttering that he hated prostitutes. He put the knife in her mouth. Choking her, 45 seconds later, she blacked out. When Cynthia regained consciousness, she found herself in front of a house with her attacker gone. Later the same night, Cynthia told another client about the attack, describing the assailant's Jeep and suggesting he may have worn an aviator mechanic's uniform. That she had the fortitude to continue working that night, that's incredible. Armstrong would tell police that he and Cynthia engaged in sexual activity until his father's face appeared to him, with him beginning to strangle Cynthia. Now, at some point, he said he realized he was doing something wrong, stopping and pushing Cynthia out of the Jeep and leaving. Afterwards, he went home and took a long shower. On Monday, April 10th, 2000, clear, cool spring weather accompanied the discovery of the 3 dead women near the railroad tracks in Detroit, operated by freight hauler Conrail. Conductor Ed Mannix was an hour into his 7 a.m. shift when he went to align the tracks, finding a body. His co-worker, Russell Walls, who was a switch inspector, saw the woman lying on her back with her legs propped up and parted. At that time, the 2 other bodies had not been noticed, even though they were just a few yards away. Now, they would learn that Conrail police officer Barry Lindsay had patrolled the area around 11 p.m., watching for trespassers, and drove right over the spot where the body would be found the next morning, noting nothing amiss. This helped law enforcement to pinpoint when Nicole Young was dumped there. Conrail engineer Tom DeSemplere knew it was common to see homeless people or couples engaged for a quickie along the service road by the tracks. Russell Walls added, quote, "I've seen people killed at crossings and things like that, but you never get used to it," end quote. And B.R. Bates provides many appreciated details about deaths along the tracks, enhancing our understanding of the scene that day. Tom DeSemplere told Conrail police he saw headlights at the location where Nicole's body was found, somewhere between 1 and 1:30 a.m. He thought it might have been a Jeep Cherokee with a large man getting in and out. He was there about 5 minutes. Now, Detroit PD would receive a call around 9 a.m., and officers Derek Watkins and Angela Sims arrived soon after, followed by homicide detectives. Nicole Young was also known as Robin Brown and was identified at the scene. Her body was nude from the waist down, posed with her legs spread and knees bent, and a white substance was on her thighs. A light-colored nylon stocking around her neck was the likely murder weapon. There was no decomposition, suggesting she had been left there the previous night. Eugene Fitzhugh from the Evidence Tech Unit noted that she had been posed, with her inner thighs and privates fully exposed. At 10:18 a.m., Dr. Lee Halavati pronounced unknown female 19 dead. She was found missing several fake pearl-colored nails. More police were arriving, and they spotted Rosemarie Felt, just a few yards from Young, who had far more decomposition. Wearing shiny pleather black pants, they were pulled down to mid-thigh, with the crotch cut out, exposing her genitalia, legs bent at the knee. Again. Her autopsy found a ligature mark around her neck. And then Kelly Jean Hood was discovered at the bottom of a hill, ligature marks on her neck. She was also nude from the waist down, legs bent at the knee, similarly exposed. Rape kits were performed on all 3 victims' bodies. There was a lot of work to process now with 3 separate crime scenes. And Detroit PD had no idea that Dearborn Heights PD was actively investigating the suspect. Enter Gerald Cliff, the commanding officer of Detroit's Violent Crime Section, now running the task force, which was a specialized federal unit handling high-profile cases such as homicides, sexual assaults, kidnapping, and serial killers. An extremely intelligent, educated man, as I told you in our opening episode, now retired, Cliff collaborated with B.R. Bates on this book. During a Monday morning briefing, Cliff was informed about a body that had been found. Moments later, a second call came in reporting an older body, shifting the conference room's mood from casual to tense. Then the third body was discovered, prompting the meeting to adjourn as attendees rushed to the railroad tracks. Although Cliff didn't go to the scene that day, his boss, Dennis "Doc" Richardson, did. Known for his work ethic and long hours, Richardson was either loved or hated by the team. Personnel were already at the scene collecting evidence: bloody tissues, a white blouse, cigarette butts, pearl-colored fake nails, McDonald's cup, even used condoms, since the victims appeared to be sex workers, and a pair of panties that would be linked to Kelly Hood. They also received a fax of the Conrail work schedules detailing train routes and personnel. News began to break as George Hunter from the Detroit News caught wind of something significant happening at the railroad, especially when Police Chief Benny Napoleon showed up. That was bound to attract attention. By the way, George Hunter was a colleague of B.R. Bates at this time. Cliff's boss, Doc Richardson, wanted an FBI profiler at the crime scene, but was disappointed to learn that one wouldn't be available for days. With the scene located next to a train track, he knew that time was crucial. That night, he spoke on the phone with John Bell, the special agent in charge of the Detroit FBI office and the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. Richardson explained the urgency: 3 murders with a similar modus operandi, and if they didn't catch this killer soon, there would be more bodies along the track. The BAU suggested, quote, "You're focusing too much on his successes. What you need to do is focus on his failures," end quote. This insight struck me. Finding a survivor who could identify him was vital. I had been so caught up in the body count that I hadn't thought of this, and I cheered on the BAU. Enter Everett Monroe, a detective with the Detroit Police Department assigned to the Violent Crime Task Force. Established under Police Chief Ike McKinnon and Deputy Chief Benny Napoleon, the task force was a diverse multi-agency collaboration involving local, county, state, and federal officers, which included the Detroit Police, Michigan State Police, and FBI. Members were selected based on merit and assigned to other units as needed. Federal programs covered overtime costs, ensuring quick response times. Officers received take-home cars for rapid deployment, which fostered a strong bond among the team. Now, with 3 victims, a perimeter was established for the evidence technicians, who then examined the other 2 bodies, careful to prevent contamination. Detective Monroe told B.R. Bates that Eric Armstrong appeared to have visited this location several times. George Hunter's story now appeared on the Metro page of the Detroit News on April 11th. Concerned parents gathered, seeking information about their missing daughters. Police were canvassing the area, noting that it, quote, "used to be a nice neighborhood," end quote. Reports emerged of white men driving various cars, cruising to pick up prostitutes, who described feeling threatened by these individuals. Authorities also investigated registered sex offenders and parolees, and revealed that the area was likely a dumping ground for a serial killer, with the possibility of more undiscovered bodies. Now, at this point, Detroit PD was still unaware that Dearborn Heights PD is waiting for DNA tests, which are still taking time to be processed. Detective Everett Monroe, who would later become police chief in Elberton, Florida, highlighted that finding dead prostitutes wasn't uncommon, that they make up about 32% of serial killer victims today, according to Kenneth Quinnett from Indiana University, Purdue University. Law enforcement was now struggling to identify victims and connect this to similar cases. Gerald Cliff recognized from the outset that a serial killer was on the loose. In such a high-profile case, the Violent Crime Task Force team acted urgently and coordinated their efforts to gather information and respond quickly. With support from the Fugitive Apprehension Team, they analyzed reports of similar crimes, including attempted abductions of prostitutes and any linked homicides. Their strategy involved canvassing for witnesses and interviewing survivors. Knowing that he drove a car, they mapped the suspect's likely territory, emphasizing the need for vigilant observation of the streets. Rookie officers Rodney Durham and Bradford Bullock were among those assigned to this task. They knew about the railroad tracks investigation and had been advised to stay away from Michigan Avenue, as the task force was already surveilling this area, and a marked unit might scare the suspect away. Well, the catch was that Durham and Bullock had to drive through that area, Michigan Avenue, to get to their patrol sector, and there was just no way around this. And they figured, well, what the hell, they'll get yelled at then. However, Bullock had a bold idea. Quote, "Let's find a serial killer," end quote. Now, Durham thought it was a long shot, but he was in. So around 3:30 a.m. on April 11th, less than 24 hours after this discovery of the victims at the railroad, these officers spotted a prostitute named Devin Maris. After reassuring her that they weren't there to arrest her, she shared crucial information about a dark Jeep with JEEP written on the tire cover. The driver, a white male in his late 20s to early 30s, with reddish blonde hair and glasses, had trash in the car, and the guy's shirt read Eric. This information provided a tangible lead. Several suspects were identified, including one man approaching teenage girls in a white Oldsmobile Cutlass, but he was not the right guy. Women working along Michigan Avenue were spooked, giving police any information about Johns who made them uneasy. Wilhelmina Drake called police about 10:25 p.m. to report her assault, speaking with Lieutenant Marilyn Hall Beard from the Violent Crimes Task Force. Wilhelmina described her assailant as a white male in his late 20s or 30s with a round face, reddish hair, and wire-rimmed glasses. That sounds a little familiar. He wore blue work pants, a silver watch, and had a tattoo of a lion or a tiger on his right forearm. He was driving a silver or gray Jeep, and this description really matches that of Devin Maris. The investigation was fluid. The identities of the three bodies were confirmed. Kelly Jean Hood's ex-husband Tony and Kelly's sister Shannon went to identify her. Shannon remembers the family's indifferent reaction to Kelly's death. They did not claim her body or show concern or show up for the funeral. The media bombarded Tony and Shannon, leaving Tony unable to leave the house. When Shannon did arrange for Kelly's burial, news vans were present outside the funeral parlor and then the cemetery. Rose Felt was identified by fingerprints, leading local police to contact her mother for confirmation. Now, finding information on Nicole Young was far more difficult. Her last known address led to people who claimed not to know her, but eventually an aunt was reached, and she thanked the authorities for the information, but seemed disinterested. But, as requested, the aunt sent a small photo of Nicole from when she was about 8 or 9 years old. And now the story progresses. John Eric Armstrong seemed unfazed by the surge of news media reports, returning to troll along Michigan Avenue on the night of April 11th. He believed he was invulnerable, literally getting away with murder. Meanwhile, officers Durham and Bullock were responding to an accident call in the area where they were technically not supposed to enter, but found no accident. Okie doke. So they turned down Michigan Avenue and spotted a dark Jeep. Bullock said, "Let's get behind him and see." Now, the Violent Crimes Task Force surveillance units noticed both the patrol car and the Jeep, rolling their eyes, and decided to let the patrol car take the lead as Bullock and Durham pulled the Jeep over. When approached, Armstrong casually showed his license and registration, claiming he was coming from his job as an airplane refueler at the airport in Romulus. However, Durham realized that Romulus was in the opposite direction from which he was traveling, a contradiction in his story. Frisked for weapons, Armstrong was totally compliant. Looking through the windows, Bullock saw stuff shoved under the back seats, gloves, condoms, panties, hosiery. Shit, this could be the guy. Durham then asked Bullock to run the guy, and walking back to the squad car, the hair on the back of his neck rose up straight. And Durham would share his observations with Bullock, who went to confirm what Durham had seen. And then the questions began. Where did John Eric Armstrong live? Dearborn Heights. How long had he worked at the airport? A few months. Why was he coming down Michigan Avenue? Quote, "My wife told me to take a new way home and I was coming up Michigan Ave. I got lost or something." End quote. Yeah, it still didn't make any sense to me. Durham now had the willies and was relieved when the Violent Crime Task Force's David Musmund pulled up saying, "What you got?" Well, Armstrong wound up arrested and the Jeep impounded. And who came walking along Michigan Avenue as they were waiting for a tow truck? Jasmine, also known as Cynthia Smith. Spotting the Jeep Wrangler and the man, this is just like 2 or 3 days after her own attack. And she got a look at the guy in the back seat of the police car, and it was him. Blinking wildly, she lost her mind, yelling, quote, "That's the motherfucker that tried to kill me," end quote. The police quickly moved her away from the patrol car, asking questions and getting Cynthia's story. Bullock recalled that Cynthia was a higher class of prostitute than most on Michigan Avenue. She actually looked healthy. While in the back seat of the patrol car, Armstrong began mumbling, saying, quote, "I'm glad this is all over," end quote. Durham asked him what he meant and had he ever had a run-in with police before. Eric shared that he found a body in the river about 2 or 3 months back. Wait, but what was he glad was over? Well, speaking to R.B. Bates, Durham recounted that Armstrong said he was really glad they caught him. Okay. And he read Eric his Miranda rights again and stopped him from talking. Eric was taken in to talk with the Violent Crime Task Force. Durham and Bullock went to fill in Commander Doc Richardson, who told Dunham and Bullock, "You are out of service. Go find this Devon person and keep this under your hat." Well, finding Devon Maris was no easy task. The address she'd given them was, not her real address. So it's the middle of the night now. It's dark. They're in uniform, walking around asking, "Hey, have you seen Devon? Have you seen Devon?" Around 8 a.m., they did find her in a crack house, and they did take Devon downtown and dropped her off. Police Chief Napoleon met them, instructing them to take a few days off and to keep quiet about this. Meanwhile, the brass at the 4th Precinct were pissed off that these 2 rookies had gone radio silent. They had actually sent patrol cars out looking for them, which you would do. But Dunham and Bullock deferred, letting Chief Napoleon explain, and went home crashing from exhaustion and nerves. Bullock and Dunham were nominated for the 2001 National Association of Police Organizations 8th Annual Top Cops Award, hosted by John Walsh of America's Most Wanted. Excellent! And they received honorable mention Chris Poog of Evansville Police Department in Indiana won for dismantling over 90 meth labs and his efforts to educate the public about them. Good work. Now, Cynthia Smith was taken in too and gave her statement to David Wasmund, and a photograph of a mysterious scar on her stomach was taken. An officer speculated that she might have caught herself on a piece of metal from the car door as she threw herself out to safety, rather than this being a knife slash. The police were grateful for Cynthia's statement, which was a welcome development. And, having heard the news story on the arrest, the John Cynthia had been with after the attack came forward and told the officers his story as well, figuring that this had to be the guy who attacked Cynthia. This John had actually gone looking for Cynthia on Michigan Avenue the next day to convince her to go speak to the police. Ronald, the John, said, quote, "She's a very nice person, and I expressed some concern for her welfare," end quote. Good for Ronald. He had gotten together with Cynthia on a Friday, likely April 7th, and she had told them that Armstrong picked her up between 11 and 11:30 p.m., not at the later time she gave police. Gerald Cliff recalls that the Detroit PD moved quickly in their investigation, from surveillance to arrest, with Armstrong never realizing the 3 other bodies had been discovered. The bulk of the Detroit police themselves were unaware of the scope of the surveillance operation that had taken place, ensuring that Armstrong would not have access to another victim. Cliff pointed out that, quote, "Some cases do require lengthy, complex investigation before a perpetrator can be identified and arrested. One of the trademarks of the Violent Crime Task Force was that when we had a case ongoing, no one went home until the investigation either produced an arrest or all the available leads were exhausted," end quote, while with a bunch of worn-out officers as well. Once Armstrong was in custody, everyone could catch some sleep, take a shower, and grab a snack. Next, they compiled the accumulated data, organized it, connected the dots, which led to Armstrong being held over at a preliminary examination. Once that took place, they could begin to fill in the blanks. And all the while, quote, "We have no clue that bodies are piling up in Detroit," end quote, said Donald Riley of the Dearborn Heights PD. And then finally, the DNA results done on Wendy Jordan came back. The male DNA from the rectal swabs taken from her matched that of John Eric Armstrong. Relieved, Detective Lieutenant Gary Tomkiewicz, head of major crimes in Dearborn Heights, happened to be on the phone with a Detroit Police Department colleague that he had worked with on a previous case. It was then Tomkiewicz learned what was happening in Detroit and that they were all after the same guy, John Eric Armstrong. April 12, 2000, Eric Armstrong was interviewed at the police headquarters. Not handcuffed, he was fed and relatively comfortable, and this situation was far more serious than when he was complaining about his trash being stolen. Detective Police Officer Donald Johnson and Wayne County Sheriff Detective James Hines, who were both Violent Crime Task Force members, sat down with Eric. They both felt pressure due to the significance of this case, and Hines with only 6 years as a detective. Speaking with B.R. Bates in 2020, he said the key was keeping his emotions under check, to be calm, and focused on building a rapport to extract a confession from this huge man cuddling his coat. Johnson and Hines asked about his tattoos, and then moved on to discussion on cereal and hockey. Finally, they got to his family history, his relationship with his wife, as he slowly began to break down some, becoming more relaxed. Hines got the impression that while passive, Armstrong thought that he and Johnson were Keystone cops. That is, until Johnson brought up the bodies found at the tracks. Armstrong denied having anything to do with it, but he was on edge now. He was attempting to present himself as a really nice guy who could never do anything like that. Then Hines asked Eric about attending college, which he said he had. Well, then he was a smart guy, and he knows about DNA, right? Hines reached over and rubbed his hand on Eric, saying, quote, "When I just did that, I left a little of me on you and a little of you on me. You left a lot of you on those victims," end quote. And Armstrong began yelling, quote, "I killed him! I killed him! I killed him! I killed him!" End quote. As if a door closed in his memory were blown open suddenly, as Johnson quickly exited the room, getting word to his bosses that Armstrong had just confessed that he'd killed the women. Returning to the interrogation room, they reread Eric his Miranda rights, which would be repeated every time they began discussing a new victim, as Eric walked them through each murder. Donald Johnson, who already had some pictures in his head after studying the crime scene photos at the track, was listening to Eric, his vivid descriptions of what had happened, how the victim had responded, envisioning his father's face, strangling them, how he positioned them, how he returned to the bodies. After 10 or 12 hours of this, Hines and Johnson needed relief. Ira Todd, also of the Violent Crime Task Force, joined Johnson for a bit, and then Agent Gregory Gelder took over the interrogation. Eventually, Everett Monroe would assist with taking his statements, as Eric Armstrong just kept talking. In between food breaks, they learned about the murders that they were not aware of, stretching across the country and eventually around the world. Utterly chilling. By the way, the research that B.R. Bates has done on this book is extraordinary. She provides this great insight into the background of each of these officers involved and their recollections of Armstrong and the investigation from that time. And I cannot more highly recommend this book for all of these details that I just can't get into, short of having like a 10-episode series. So please put this book on the to-read list. All right, summarizing day one. Armstrong gave all the details on his killing of Rosemarie Felt, Monica Johnson, Kelly Jean Hood, Nicole Young, Wendy Jordan, a white female he'd killed in Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia, an Asian transgender woman in Thailand, a white female in Seattle, a black male also in Seattle, Washington, 2 white females in Waikiki, Hawaii, and an Asian female in Hong Kong, as well as his assault on Cynthia Smith. So yes, we now realize he is killing while serving aboard the USS Nimitz, going to ports all over the world. During his shore leave, he was looking for prey to murder, and the magnitude of this just exceeds my imagination. Well, the next day, April 13th, 2000, he confessed to killing another Asian female in Thailand, and another in Singapore, and another in Hong Kong. And these do not include Nastasia Olniak, Wilhelmina Drain, Devin Marius, or Zelda Jacobowski. Eric Armstrong would estimate the number of people he killed at 15. A note he would write indicated he wasn't exactly sure, however, but he had stopped counting at 8. And he also apologized to all the women he killed and their families who suffered due to his actions. Not buying it. While identifying who and where his kills took place, he ate eggs and hash browns, then hamburgers and fries. This is just rolling off his back, guys. Just rolling off his back. Asked if he knew how he was caught, Eric said he wasn't sure, but then he thought it was due to, quote, keeping that one female alive, end quote. Bates writes that this seems like he made a decision and it wasn't exactly a mistake, and I think I agree. Did Monroe think he was being truthful? Yes. He remembered what happened. He knew intimate details. But if you went into his childhood or his relationship with his parents, he got angry and shut down. And I opened with Monroe's statement about this. Ira Todd was pushing his buttons, and at one point Eric jumped up and punched a very heavy metal filing cabinet, it weighing a couple 100 pounds, like 90 kilograms, and he moved it a few inches away. So he is not as soft and docile as he likes to appear. Todd would say, quote, "He was passive, but if you hit the right button, he would turn into a monster right in front of you. Right in front of you," end quote. While all these confessions were flowing from this dysfunctional well, Chief Benny Napoleon held a press conference announcing that there was a serial killer at work in the city. Then later the same day, he held another press conference, which had the press giddy, wondering what was happening. Was there another victim? Was there an update? One reporter asked the chief as he walked in, would they now be getting daily briefings? And the chief smiled, saying, quote, "No, this will be it," end quote, going to announce that John Eric Armstrong, the alleged killer, was in custody, and gave an overview of the massive investigation that had occurred to capture him so quickly. The public were relieved and the elation great, though it did deflate some when George Hunter, the investigative journalist with the Detroit News, wrote a story with the headline, "3 Killed After Suspect Released," when Hunter learned that the Dearborn Heights Police Department had Armstrong pegged as the killer, but let him go pending the DNA results. Well, I understand the angst that this might stir, but this is an important factor. Under the law, the preliminary exam has to be held within 14 days. And if you don't have enough evidence to hold someone for trial, he's released, which is why they were waiting on the DNA results so they could arrest him and keep the suspect in jail. It's one of those weighing the outcome situation, and I'm glad that DNA comes back faster today. Well, with the arrest and the news coverage, Dearborn Police Department Detective William Sullivan realized that Eric Armstrong may have attacked Natasha Olniak, who also saw the coverage in the newspaper. Natasha called Sullivan, who then reached out to Detroit's Detective Wasserman and Detective Lieutenant Tomkiewicz of the Dearborn Heights PD. Now all 3 jurisdictions were on to the crimes of this same guy. Years later, Chief Benny Napoleon spoke nostalgically about the advantages of having the homicide and sex crime units centralized, so all the departments were coordinating their efforts and sharing information as puzzle pieces began to fill in the picture. Well, the arrest was now public. Monica Johnson's mother, Beatrice, then 52, told the news, quote, "My heart is broken and I feel sorry for the kids and the mothers too. I feel better that he was caught, but I don't know why he did what he did," end quote. Armstrong's former Target coworker, Nancy Miller, who I mentioned, was shocked and horrified, literally vomiting in her kitchen, recognizing what a bad judge of character she was. Speaking to detectives, and they assured her that he wouldn't have gone after her. He was only after prostitutes. Then it hit Nancy. Eric had not had stomach issues that day at work when he pulled over and supposedly spotted a body in the river. Coworker Jennifer, who had ridden back and forth to work with Eric, was relieved hearing there had been arrest, knowing how the police would leave Eric alone, only to be aghast, her knees buckling under her. Eric was arrested? She had completely trusted Eric. He had been kind to her. He went out of his way for her, treated her like a real person. He loved his family. How could he be strangling prostitutes? Now, coincidentally, Jennifer was in high school at this time taking psychology and studying serial killers and mental illness. Eric was actually discussed in her class, with Jennifer never revealing that she knew him. Crying her eyes out that day, the truth savagely hit her, and she read every newspaper story on Eric she could find. Her friend, her confidant, died that day, leaving only a monster behind. Police were also searching Eric's in-laws' home, where he lived, with dogs, ultimately confiscating a uniform of his with suspected blood spatter on the sleeve, Trojan and lifestyle condom boxes and wrappers, porn magazines, and then a pair of black panties in the trash can, plus a camera with exposed film. The Jeep was gone over again in greater detail, finding more used condom wrappers and a road atlas with blood drops on them. Dusted for fingerprints, the seats were vacuumed. More carpet samples were taken, strands of hair were found and bagged, a clasp of a necklace, chewing gum, pair of gloves, socks, a hairbrush, box cutter, and utility knife were found. 3 survivors had spoken of Eric wielding a knife: Natasha, Zelda, and Cynthia. Eric's workplace at the Signature Flight Support was also handed a search warrant for his locker and the storage area where he was assigned. Employment records, work application, background check information were among some of the records acquired. More tips and calls came to the police, and Wilhelmina Drang, who gave another statement, very quickly identified Eric in a lineup of 6 white men, 20s and 30s, over 6 foot tall and over 200 pounds. His defense attorney would claim that Eric's picture had been shown on TV, and it wasn't known if Wilhelmina had watched the news at that time or not. As Eric spoke to the police officers, his demeanor was fairly passive. However, he could become quite hostile, again speaking of those early years and about his hatred for his father. He confided in Detective Johnson that his biological father had sexually abused him when he was a small child when his mom left for work, and he would also step in and protect his little brother. Eric also shared that his wife rejected him sexually, and I promise I will get into this more. But this is when Everett Monroe realized that he had a dual personality, not dissociative identity disorder or split personality, but a dual personality, which was fluid depending on his dysfunctional internal dialogue with himself. At certain times, the motivation to kill emerged. His hatred of prostitutes may have manifested after being rejected by a high school girlfriend for another guy who had given her presents. Arraigned the next day on April 14th, Gregory Gelder went with Eric on his perp walk, where the media would see the accused serial killer for the first time. Right beforehand, Eric Armstrong made a request. He wanted to hold a teddy bear, and Commander Doc Richardson scoffed, denying this. No way was Eric going to introduce himself to the media as a man-child, bewildered, literally a teddy bear hugger. No way was that happening. Mute, hanging his head with tears in his eyes, John Eric Armstrong was charged with first-degree premeditated murder of 4 women in this jurisdiction, but also on a number of assault charges for the surviving victims. A friend of Kelly Jean Hood, Isabella Ramirez, would say, quote, "He didn't look like a killer. He looked so pitiful," end quote. Yeah, that dual personality at work here. District Court Magistrate Irma Chimavert Bragg entered pleas of not guilty. In Dearborn Heights, an innocent plea was entered for him by Judge Leo Ferran. Then Eric was returned to jail and placed on suicide watch. The press would reach out to his mother, Linda, the poor woman. His father-in-law would issue a statement expressing condolences for the family of the victims. A few days later, Linda and Eric's stepfather, Ron, arrived in Detroit with their son, a teenage boy, Eric's half-brother. Police would give the shell-shocked teen a Red Wings jacket. While speaking with police, Linda and Ron first learned about Eric's accusations against his biological dad from Detective Johnson, as well as the charges against Eric, which had begun shortly after the Armstrongs arrived in Detroit. And keep in mind, all of this is happening between April 8th and April 14th, so we're talking barely a week. And it's not uncommon for the real investigation to kick in after the arrest. Remember, police have 72 hours to make the case to a judge that a crime was committed in their jurisdiction, and then they had 12 days to prove probable cause that Armstrong had committed the crime. Now, the corroboration of the confessions began, with federal investigators digging into his other non-Michigan confessions, backtracking through Armstrong's naval career, dates, times, ports, shore leave, missing person and homicide reports from the ports from the time that might match his MO. All of this has to be coordinated and reconciled with the confessions. This is a daunting task given the variety of nations and agencies involved, and it all had to be done right. For example, Armstrong's blood sample testing was delayed until after the DNA was processed to absolutely prevent any possible allegations of cross-contamination. Smart. Very smart. Armstrong's court-appointed attorney was Robert F. Mitchell, an experienced criminal defense lawyer known for his gravelly voice and colorful swagger. He often incorporated humor into his court appearances. Prosecutor Elizabeth Walker, disillusioned by her early career as a teacher, had turned to law to pursue justice, and the case against Armstrong was complicated, with prostitute witnesses who bore the baggage and stigma of social condemnation and ostracism. And Walker was particularly concerned about Devin Maris, who had a drug problem, so she kept her in jail to prevent an overdose before her testimony. In Walker's legal battle against Mitchell, she knew he was a crafty opponent. One memorable day, Walker deliberately wore mismatched shoes, knowing the jury would be focused on them rather than what the prosecution witnesses were saying. It's tricky, but smart. Mitchell requested psychological testing for Eric in the Wendy Jordan case, delaying the preliminary hearing to evaluate his competency, similar to the defense's actions in Detroit. While this was going on May 18th, the Dearborn Police Department issued an arrest warrant for the attempted murder of Natasha Olniak. In court that day, Katie Armstrong maintained her husband's innocence. After Natasha's testimony, Armstrong was bound over for circuit court. Now the Dearborn police retrieved the silver belt buckle found in Natasha's room during their investigation. Coincidentally, in 1999, Armstrong worked for a company called Initial Security, and the silver belt buckle matched their logo. Now that is called circumstantial evidence. Now, more testing results came back. Items in Armstrong's Jeep had been treated with superglue fuming and rhodamine 6G dye, but no additional fingerprints were found. But the DNA testing revealed that Monica Johnson could not be excluded as a contributor to one of the condoms. So, in Michigan, Armstrong faces 5 first-degree murder charges and 4 assault charges. However, the prosecution was still concerned that there may be other victims and survivors out there that they did not know about. After evaluations by several psychologists, Armstrong was found competent to stand trial for the murder of Wendy Jordan. The assault case against Wilhelmina Drain was dropped due to her refusal to enter a courtroom influenced by media coverage. The woman was just spooked. By January 2001, DNA and trace evidence was analyzed, with the strongest evidence held by Dearborn Heights Police Department, placing Jordan in the Jeep with Armstrong. The trial against John Eric Armstrong began on February 26, 2001, with Judge Mary Waterstone presiding. Defense attorney Mitchell acknowledged that Armstrong had sexual contact with Jordan, but pursued the insanity defense, claiming Armstrong didn't understand right from wrong. He also mentioned a tip about 3 black men being seen with Wendy that night. Opening statements began with 8 men and 4 women listening. Observing were Wendy's sisters, Bonnie and Judy, and Kelly Hood's family, along with Armstrong's mom, Linda, and her husband, Ron. Prosecutor Walker emphasized Armstrong's cooperation leading to evidence linking him to Wendy Jordan in his Jeep. She told the jurors, quote, "He wasn't drunk. He knew exactly what he was doing. He hated prostitutes, but engaged Wendy Jordan's services and ultimately killed her," end quote. The defense claimed it was absurd that Armstrong had lifted a 140-pound, 64-kilogram woman and threw her over the railing of the bridge. It was just impossible. The next witness noted that although Armstrong pulled over to vomit, there was no vomit found anywhere on the bridge, supported by witness Sarah Davos and her boyfriend. Members of the dive team who retrieved Wendy's body from the river also testified. Following them, the chief medical examiner, Dr. Carl Schmidt, stated that Wendy had been manually strangled. And James Saratowski from the Dearborn Heights Police Department faced intense questioning as he testified about the location of Armstrong's Jeep, the reason why Armstrong's story raised red flags, and the rigorous questioning that Armstrong had endured at this police station despite him expressing exhaustion. Evidence was entered into the record: Armstrong's written statements, condom wrappers, search warrants, Wendy's gold shoe, with Mitchell questioning if the shoe actually fit Wendy. Oh, please. Wendy's sister Bonnie would testify that the shoe did fit her sister. Mitchell began the defense by emphasizing that Eric had been in counseling as a child. Dr. Kelmies Dudley Jr. testified that Armstrong suffered from intermittent explosive disorder and had experienced sexual abuse from his father as a child. Quote, "He has been haunted by the nightmare of his father's abuse for more than 20 years, end quote. A clinical psychologist shared that Armstrong saw his father's face while looking at the prostitutes. Armstrong also blamed himself for his baby brother's death. He struggled with alcoholism and suffered from depression. His wife Katie testified about her husband's suicide attempt, noting that he had planned to take a lethal dose of cold medicine. She asserted that there was no way Eric could have committed this crime, as he had always dreamed of becoming a police officer. Walker called rebuttal witnesses during the trial, including a forensic psychologist who claimed Armstrong was malingering and faking mental illness. Sailors from the USS Nimitz testified about his struggles with stress, and a nurse from Wayne County Jail revealed that Armstrong felt sadness for hurting these women. In her closing argument, Elizabeth Walker allowed 30 seconds of silence to highlight the time it took for Wendy Jordan to die. While the jury would deliberate for 2 hours on March 8, 2001, finding John Eric Armstrong guilty of first-degree murder, with his parents and Wendy's sisters crying in the court. Bonnie told the press, quote, "My sister would have been 41. Our family has waited a very long time for this day, and I feel justice has been done. He can never do this again," end quote. Victims' impact statements expressed relief, anger, and accusations, questioning why he had the right to ruin so many lives. The next case scheduled for trial was Kelly Jean Hood, to be presided over by Judge Mary Waterstone. Ira Harris replaced defense attorney Mitchell, who had been criticized by Armstrong for his poor performance, while Virginia Terzacoma joined Walker. This time, known assault survivors of Armstrong would testify, making a strong impression on the jurors. But a significant issue arose: the disappearance of survivor witness Cynthia Smith. In this trial, the defense claimed that Armstrong was insane due to his actions, but the DNA evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution argued that his behavior was, quote, "purposeful and goal-directed," end quote. Conrail conductor Ed Mannix testified about finding the first body of Nicole Young, leading to the discovery of Roosevelt and Kelly Hood. Officers Brad Bullock and Rodney Durham, who pulled Armstrong over, along with evidence technicians, provided important testimony. Devin Maris, recalled being attacked by Armstrong, noting his tattoos. Evidence included a camera, films, and porn magazines from Eric's home, as well as that signature flight support uniform. A forensic serologist confirmed that the DNA in the Jeep matched Kelly's blood, and Armstrong's DNA was found in a rape kit. On day 3, thank goodness, Cynthia Smith was located in Colorado and agreed to testify. Natasha Olniak shared her traumatic experience, revealing that Eric had used the name John, his father's name, during her attack. The defense would call a psychiatrist who testified about Eric's troubled past and emotional struggles. But this jury would convict him of Kelly Hood's murder. Kelly's mother, Jonelle, spoke, quote, "You took a part of me that can never be replaced, and there is no describing the pain I feel inside. It will be with me for the rest of my life. My daughter's death will be with me forever." End quote. Armstrong would say, "I'm sorry." After the Hood trial, only 2 victims had received justice. Now, Elizabeth Walker offered Armstrong a plea deal, and on June 18, 2021, he pled guilty to the second-degree murder of Monica Johnson, Rose Felt, and Nicole Young, and to the assault with intent to cause great bodily harm for Cynthia Smith and Natasha Olniak. The cases of Wilhelmina Drang and Devin Maris were dismissed. Taking the deal, Armstrong now had plenty of time to think all alone in his prison cell. In April 2022, Armstrong appealed his convictions, claiming his confessions were coerced through intimidating police practices. However, the appellate court affirmed his convictions, and as of October 2024, he is serving his sentence at the Robert G. Cotton Correctional Facility in Jackson, Michigan. But there is still so much to do with the Armstrong case. When he began confessing, it was apparent that there were other victims flung far and wide, given Armstrong's time on the USS Nimitz from 1993 to 1996. The book adopts a chronological investigation of these crimes rather than follow the disjointed revelations that Armstrong provided. Well, when exactly was his first murder? All right, it is possible it was actually in North Carolina in 1992, just prior to enlisting in the Navy. However, he told police it was in 1991, right before he graduated high school. All right, important point. He is very fluid on these dates. Most likely scenario is that his first murder was in mid-August 1993, occurring near the berth where the USS Nimitz was docked in Bremerton, Washington. Armstrong was pretty detailed in his recounting of this. It was his first time in Seattle, and a woman approached him offering sex, and he told her to go, to leave him alone. She followed him, calling him a Navy boy, and entering an alley, she taunted him again, with Eric hitting her twice in the face, blood flowing. He strangled her until she passed out. He raped her using a condom, and he would pick her up, pushing her into a large dumpster before heading back to the ship. She was white, mid-20s to early 30s, and a medium build. Well, why had he killed her? Quote, "Because she looked like my ex-fiancé a little bit," end quote, and made him angry, talking down to him, making him feel stupid. November 21st, 1996. Also in Seattle, walking along Pioneer Square, a black man was persistent, asking him for money. Annoyed, Eric turned down an alley, picking up a pipe. When the man followed, he bashed him across the shoulder and head. The man fell down, and Eric continued to beat him with the pipe. Afterward, he went to a bar and had a beer. And it was a few days before his birthday, and he, quote, "got a rush. Just hitting somebody, just losing control was a little exciting to me," end quote. Now, this man was not a hooker. He did not have sex with him. He did not rob him, nor did he kill this man because of his race. Thought this might have been the first murder, but he wasn't sure. When asked again why he killed, Eric said he liked to be in control. Now, several other murders seem to have happened after this 1996 Seattle killing. all overseas. This first international murder was at the end of 1996 in Thailand, on a very hot evening, as Eric was returning to his hotel room just off the main drag. He had picked up a hooker, but when he saw her standing up to pay, Eric became angry, warning it to get out. In the kerfluffle, he threw the prostitute out the window. At the time, there was no investigation, and the body was just removed. Then asked what he normally did to his victims, Eric replied, quote, "I leave their legs spread open," end quote. Asked why he did this, he claimed not to know, that it was just the way he was setting them down. "Nope, I don't believe this, and I think it was just an effort to humiliate them." Mirandized once more, he confessed to killing again a day or so later at a hotel near Pattaya Beach. He met her on the streets, a petite Asian woman with long black hair. Going to his room, he paid her $30. After sex, he manually strangled her. Now he went down to the desk. He got himself another hotel room, leaving her body in the first room. Gregory Guider of the Violent Crime Task Force would say he, quote, "found it particularly chilling that he would leave a woman's body in one room and casually get another room in the same establishment," end quote. Yeah, I agree. This guy is cold-blooded. In March 1997, Singapore, approached by a prostitute, he went back to her apartment on Orchard Street, with him paying her $50. After sex, he killed her, again with his bare hands. He did not steal anything, nor position her, and it had taken about 10 minutes for her to die. March 31st, 1997, now docked in Hong Kong, he went on shore leave with fiancée Katie. The next night, he went out alone to a bar filled with hookers. Going to a hotel room next door, she was short, about 100 pounds or 45 kilograms, with long dark hair in her late 30s. She asked him to take a shower, and when he exited, he found her going through his wallet. Grabbing her around the throat, she was pushed to the floor and choked. Realizing what he was doing, he finally stopped and assumed she was dead, and he went back to the ship. April 2nd, 1997, or thereabouts, Armstrong would kill again. He headed towards a bar, and she approached him, taking his hand. He paid her $30 for straight sex, and then they headed to her place, which was around the corner. After sex, he strangled her to death. He left her naked from the waist down, but did not position her. It was after this confession that he upped his numbers of kills from 9 to the 15 I've mentioned. May 1997 in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. He and Katie left the ship, taking a bus into Waikiki in Honolulu, checking into a hotel called the Outrigger. But he and Katie got into an argument with her leaving. Eric met up with a buddy, going to pick up some hookers and having sex with them. The next night, Eric went to the same woman's apartment, having sex on her black sofa. But after sex, he strangled her with his hands until she fell unconscious. Out of control, he continued to strangle her with her own tan stockings, this lasting about 20 minutes. This time, he said he was getting back at Katie. He left her face up on the floor and flushed the condom down the toilet. This was the first of 2 victims in Hawaii. This woman was blonde, very skinny, in her early 30s, with a possible German accent. He hadn't planned on choking her, but he knew it might happen. Now, when comparing his dates with the Nimitz schedule, Eric has clearly mixed up the whens, but he could describe the women in great detail. His second victim in Hawaii was a redhead killed the next night. Again, after sex, he quickly strangled her. He left and then went back to his hotel, taking a shower. He later expressed that he was upset, crying, and fearful that he would go to prison. Now, the USS Nimitz would leave port at 8 a.m. the next morning, and the next stop was Newport News, Virginia. And in 2 weeks, I will release the conclusion of this amazing true crime book, episode 115, Savage Truths. And we will see where the continuing investigation against John Eric Armstrong goes, plus my psychological analysis as part of Second Cast. There are some twists coming, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And check out the book, because I can't tell you everything. My sources, photographs, diagrams, recipe, drink selection are all on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, February 2025. Now, some of you have asked how you can help. Well, introduce your family and friends to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. Thank you for being with me on our journey together into the stories, updates, and analysis of the best true crime books out there. Email me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you in 2 weeks. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.